Nobunaga's ambition is a storied game franchise from Japan that does not get a lot of attention in the West. It has had crossovers with Pokemon and a bunch of other game franchises, and even though it has had all of this recognition, in the West, it has been hidden a lot of times because its subject matter is so Japanese in nature that most Japanese people find that there is not a lot of interest in the West in this style of like game about unifying Japan. It's named after Oda Nobunaga, who himself is one of the great unifiers of Japan, one of the three great unifiers of Japan. And as a result, I think there's a amount of cultural difference with a game like this where it's difficult to localize and to advertise to a Western audience, especially because the game is rather slow playing as well, largely due to the old hardware that the game was running on, although it was rather ambitious for its time. Well, there's one piece in particular that is really worth looking at, and today we will be talking about Two Distant Friends. So this is the chord chart for Two Distant Friends. Taking a look at what we have here, there seems to be a lot of nested harmonies and parentheses, and we'll talk about those at length. So we're going to get right into function with this piece. This is our function diagram if you haven't seen it before, but it gives a generalized function for every triad. So we're starting out on our major 1 chord here. Well, that's pretty obviously the 1 chord. He just keeps playing it, right? And then the melody starts. Right? So at this point, we start out on 1. And then we do this little double tonicization. And then we land on this C minor chord. So this feels like another, like those 2 chords are just going in the direction of that C minor chord. And so they don't have a typical function based on our function diagram, but you see that I've labeled them blue and red because 2 and 5 are blue and red respectively. Even though, in the key of E flat, D is not a 2, but I'm calling it a 2 because it sounds like 2, 5, 1, right? So it's only because of how it's functioning in this context, right? So you see the 2 and the 5 are coming from the fact that it sounds like a 2 and a 5 rather than being actually a 2 and a 5 in the key of E flat. So this tonicization is a double tonicization. It's a major double tonicization. In this case, it's a tonicization of 6, right? So we start on 1, and then we drop down a half step in the bass, and then do a half diminished chord, and that half diminished chord is going to be the 2 half diminished. And then you're going to go to 5, and then that's going to resolve back to 1, and that's going to be the C minor chord. Now, the next part is another 2-5-1. In this case, it's a 2-5-1 of 4. So we start out with a 2-5-1 of 6. And then get another 2-5-1. So we have 2 consecutive 2-5-1s in a row. First a 2-5-1 of 6, then a 2-5-1 of 4. So, now 4 as a chord is kind of difficult to give a function to right here, right? Because if we think about it, doesn't that feel like it resolves there? Shouldn't that be a tonic function chord? But the thing is that in the home key, it feels like a 4 chord. Right? So what do we make it? Do we make it green because it feels like a resolution was on the back end, or do we make it blue because it feels like it was ambiguous on the end? Well, I think that the best option here is to call a 4 a 4. 1 of 4 is 4. So let's call it blue because it's 4. And another really good argument for why we should call it 4 is that this progression is based on the Royal Road progression. In fact, the 4-2 variant of the Royal Road progression, where the bass stays the same for the first 2 notes. It could have went right like that, but instead they kept the bass there. That's just a very common variation of the Royal Road progression. Well, now we're coming onto a really unusual chord, right? So this is where our cadence is supposed to be, right? We have blue and then red. You see at the third system, we have blue and then red at the end. Okay, so this is our cadence. Blue then red. Okay, so we have... No, but he doesn't do that. He does this. Isn't that unusual? Isn't that extremely bright for no reason? Well, let me play it again. I mean, what a statement that is, right? It's a natural 3 chord. And what's unusual about that is a natural 3 chord typically will resolve to 6, but it doesn't. It just goes back to 1. So it's really a dominant function natural 3 chord in this context, which is kind of an unusual thing to even know that it could possibly exist, but it does in this case. See, it's a rather ingenious little thing, and the whole reason that Yoko Kanno is using this chord is to set up for something, and we're gonna get to what it's setting up for, but she's introducing this unusual tonality for a purpose, right? Well, then we get a big repetition, right? Da 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 da. Right, so then we get this sort of very traditional cadence. So the first time we had this wacky, and now we have, right now we have our actual 2 to 5, right? In this case, it's a natural 2 to 5, and that natural 2 to 5 is a 5 of 5 likely, right? It's probably 5 of 5. But as a result of being in a cadential spot, we're going to call it natural 2. I think that makes more sense. Because natural 2 is predominant function and 5 of 5 is like a dominant function, right? Well, now let's look at what's going on here. We have natural 2 and we have natural 3. Both of those are in that box on the right, right? The major parallel secondary chords. Wouldn't it be cool if later down in the piece there was a natural 6 chord or something that completed that box? Well, maybe. Anyway, ignoring that, now we have kind of a weird double tonicization. It's not even on my diagram. It would have been where the arrow was pointing to, but the thing about it is one of the chords is actually diatonic to the key, so it's not really a double tonicization at all. It's more like a single tonicization. But it's interesting that it looks like a double tonicization because we had all those double tonicizations at the beginning, right? So it kind of implies that a double tonicization, and it's calling back to those earlier statements that were actually double tonicization. So here's this B section. You get one of those very jazzy sounding flat 9 chords. That's very fun. And so let's talk about this tonicization, right? So 2 of 2, right? This is a 2-5-1 of 2, right? See, it feels like it resolves to right here. Da, ba, ba, da, 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 right? That feels like kind of a 2-5-1, right? But because the G minor 7 is a diatonic chord, in this case it's 3-7, it's not really a true double tonicization. Because it's more like 3-7, 5-7 of 2-2. So it's really only a single tonicization. Well, at this point, there's only a couple things left in the piece, right? You get a repetition of the B section, or you could say the answer of the B section. You get the antecedent and the consequent. And on the answer, you get this really, really normal, basic, not unusual 2-5. Right? And then it resolves to natural 6, which was the thing that we said before. Look at this. We have all 3 of them. Right? That completes the major parallel secondary chords. Isn't that awesome? So we finally get our completed set of chords. And you notice how bright that resolution sounded, right? Right? It's such a wonderful resolution. And then we get this turnaround here at the end, which brings us back to the beginning of the form. So let's just recap what's going on here, right? We have double tonicizations, we have parallel secondary chords, and we have, so like here's all of our double tonicizations, here are our parallel secondary chords, and then you have these Royal Road progressions, right? These sections, rather than thinking about them as double tonicizations, these second 2 Royal Road progressions, I like thinking of those as Royal Road progressions because they feel like, right? That sort of very Japanese sounding, like pop music progression. When I hear, I definitely think Royal Road progression, but I think of that as sort of a variation of the Royal Road progression. In this case, you know, those 2 ones are based on the 4-2 variant, but these 2 ones are based on the 5-7 of 2 or 5-7 of 4 variant, right? Right? Instead of a minor 6, we get the 5-7 of 2, right? Or the 5-7 of 4. I guess it depends if you're in a major or a minor key. So there's also a rule of 3 going on here, right? So in the previous video, we talked about a little bit the rule of 3 in Zelda. Well, here it is. Here we got double tonicizations, got Royal Road progressions, and we got the parallel secondary chords. This piece is really only playing with 3 devices. And that's really it for this piece. So let's recap. Right? We have a double tonicization, another double tonicization, a Royal Road progression, and then we get that parallel secondary chord, and then we get a repetition. This new parallel secondary chord. And then in the B section, we get a Royal Road progression that also sort of sounds like a double tonicization. So it's kind of like combining the 2. That was just a cadence, or a half cadence. Right? And then we get that final parallel secondary chord, which is really nice. And then that turnaround to bring us back to the beginning. So that's really it for Two Distant Friends. It's an interesting piece of music. I think it really, it is so many interesting little relationships and uses some of these odd chords. Like parallel secondary chords are not common chords to be seen used in this context, just like by themselves, completely unprepared. She's just using them for the beautiful bright color that they add to a piece in the major key, right? So I'd recommend going to the piano, looking at the parallel secondary chords and trying to use them in context. I mean, study the way that Yoko Kanno uses them in this piece and try to figure out how exactly did they get this wonderful sort of bright sound out of these chords, you know? Well, that's it for now. I know this was a much more complicated video than the ones that I did in the past. But it's only going to get more complicated. We're only going to be talking about more and more um, intricate sort of subjects as we go on in this channel. I wanted to do this one because it's extremely complicated, and I know that going forward we're going to step back a bit and do a little bit simpler music, but stuff like this is for my core audience, you know, the people who really want in-depth analyses and who don't want to be babied. So, you know, that's part of the way that I do things. I hope you appreciate this sort of this analysis, and it's not going away. I'll be here for the next amount of time that, you know, I am needed. So donate to my Ko-Fi, uh, help me out, and I'll keep doing this. Thank you so much for watching, and good evening.